Hello everyone, and welcome to my presentation, Librarians' Lives, Making Connections, Promoting Resilience Through Podcasting. I'm Jo Wood, and I can be found on Twitter as myself at JoWood04, and as the podcast that Lives with Lives. That I'm quite librarian on both, probably Lives with Lives to my slightly more professional head, JoWood04 straight into strictly Avengers films now varnished, that sort of thing, Captain America, that kind of thing. I'm really excited to be here today. I was actually asked to come in and speak at the conference by Claire Sewell, who's sitting in the audience. I spoke at ILI, Internet Librarian International, in October, and she came up and said, we'd like you to come and speak in Cambridge in January. And I said, that's great. What do you want me to talk on? And she said, whatever you like. And I thought, brilliant. And I said, how long have I got? And she said, you've got up to an hour. And I went, great. What could I talk about? I could talk about Strictly, I could talk about nail varnish, I could talk about Christmas, jigsaw puzzles. But actually, I thought I'd better keep with the theme, so I've kept it libraries. So here's what I'm going to talk about. So I'm going to talk a bit about my career so far, and there's a reason for that. Everyone else I've heard speak today has said, I'm so-and-so, I'm from X Cambridge Library, or Y Cambridge faculty, and but you all know me. And I'm thinking, I don't really know any of you, because I don't work in Cambridge. So I'm going to talk about my career so far, and kind of things that have happened. I'm also going to talk about mental health and resilience, which is something that people don't talk about. You get to hear about the wonderful project they've worked on, but you don't hear about all the stuff that goes on behind it. I'm going to talk about why I created a podcast, kind of from nothing, out of my own head. And I'm going to talk a bit about the process of doing that as well. So if any of you are thinking of doing something similar in your own settings, or just interested in that, then I'm going to offer some hints and tips. Mostly, don't do what I did, because I've kind of learned as I've gone. So lots of how not to do stuff. I'm also going to talk about what the podcast has done for me. Being here is a great example of that. What it's done for other people as well, for the participants and the listeners, and how it's brought people together, not just in the UK, but actually across the world. And I'll give you a demonstration of that later. And then some learning stuff on how to do your own library podcast. And at the end, you'll get all the links and details you'll need if you want to explore that further. So this is my career so far. So one of the questions I'm asked, because I've been doing the podcast since September 2017, and some people assume that I don't actually have a proper job. And I just want to emphasise that I really, really do. And the Librarians' Lives is kind of my side project, my side hustle. So I started off when I was a student as a bookseller in Blackwell's, in Reading. My first library post was in Oxford. So I was at the Oxford Union as a graduate trainee there. I then moved to London and worked at the National Maritime Museum. And actually the photo you see in the background, that's the Queen's House, the white building at the bottom there. And then bottom left is the actual National Maritime Museum, and my office and the library were in that building. When I qualified, I moved to Barnardo's, the children's charity, which is in East London. I was the Library and Information Service Officer there, and I'm now currently the Library and Information Service Manager at CAFCAS. That's the Children and Family Court Advisory and Support Service. Just a note on that, I'm happy for you to tweet about me and the talk, but can you not mention CAFCAS in the tweets? My colleague works on freedom of information requests, and there are certain people that don't really like CAFCAS, mainly because they've had a hard time with the CAFCAS process, and they like to jump on things that get tweeted about CAFCAS. So if I can just ask that would be great. Thank you. And I'm happy for you to talk online about my talk. That's absolutely fine. At CAFCAS, I support 1,800 qualified social workers working with children and families across England in the family courts. I set the service up from scratch. I ran a parallel or similar service when I was at Barnardo's, providing a library service to CAFCAS using Barnardo's resources. Barnardo's decided to close their library in 2009. I was tupied over to CAFCAS and built the library up from scratch. And I said, what do you want me to do? And they said, we want you to build a library. How long have I got? And they said 6 weeks. So that was fun. So they got me a room near London Bridge and in an office, and I had about 200 books on the floor that I'd borrowed from Barnardo's. They were getting rid of it. It was all going in the skip. And I had no library management system, no copyright licence, no permissions to do anything, no journals. It was just me, and I got a skeleton service running in 6 weeks, and I've built it up from there. It's now me, and I've got a full-time library and information service officer, and he and I deal with about 5,000 requests for research and books and articles per year, sending out about 10,000 items. I deal with about 1,000 subject requests a year. the library has one of the most depressing collections you can ever work with. So I went from working at the National Maritime Museum with all the beautiful maps and the book from the medical book from the Bounty and all the amazing stuff we used to get out for talks. And now I work in a collection. I built a collection where nothing is probably older than about 1990, and even then that's ancient. It's all kind of, it has to be new stuff. It has to be current practice. I deal with the subject requests, and most of them are really kind of horrific things to work on. It's the stuff you read in the newspapers, you see online, you see on the news. The really bad stuff that happens to children and young people is the kind of stuff I know more about than anyone reasonably should. The library covers both public law, that's where children are being adopted or they're going into local authority care. It also covers private law, which is where parents are divorcing and separating and can't agree custody for their children. Underpinning that, there's all sorts of reasons why they come to the family court process. So to give you a flavour of that, it's things like all kinds of child abuse, every spectrum of that you can imagine, neglect, sexual exploitation, parental substance misuse, mental health, domestic abuse. It's not the sort of library you want to bring some primary school children around to see. Philippa this morning talked about buildings and the spaces, and I'm always struck when I come to somewhere like Cambridge by all of the beautiful spaces you have and the reading rooms and how wonderful they are and the people studying. I'm based in Bloomsbury in London in our head office, and I have scatterings of books around the office on shelves, and most of it's online. A lot of what we do is online because we run a remote service. And people who are in our Newcastle office or they're in our Plymouth office come and visit for training, and they're so disappointed when they come and see me and they're like, but where are all the books? And I'm like, well, there's some over there. And they're expecting wooden panels like Indiana Jones or the Mummy or something, and me sitting in the middle, and it's so disappointing, and I kind of ruin their illusion with that. And then my qualifications as well. There's a reason why I'm building this picture up, and I will explain that to you. So from doing the podcast, I know that most people who go into libraries either do an English degree or a history degree and then don't know what to do with it, and then they become a librarian. That seems to be what happens. If I talk to anyone that's got a science degree, I get really excited because they've really diversified. So I did a history BA and a modern history MA, and I wanted to do a PhD, and I wanted to do it on Isabella Kingdom Brunel and the railways, and nobody wanted to fund that. Can't think why. So I thought, I've got to get a proper job. So I became a graduate trainee in Oxford, and then I did my postgraduate qualification with Aberystwyth part-time, or distance learning actually, when I was at the National Maritime Museum. They very kindly paid for it for me. They weren't supposed to pay for it for me. They were supposed to pay for a bit of it, and they paid for all of it, and I've never had to pay them back. So thanks, NMM. And then I did chartership when I was at Barnardo's. And then it all goes a bit wonky in the top box, because suddenly I'm doing psychology and sport and exercise psychology, and that's a bit of a swerve, isn't it? From libraries and yay, and it's all marvellous. And then in 2012, bearing in mind I set the Kafka's Library up in 2009, in 2012 I decided I was terrible at being a librarian and I should go and do something else. So I had this kind of crisis and decided to do psychology and then sports psychology. So now I'm a very mildly qualified sport and exercise psychologist. So if you're looking to, go to the Olympics and do cycling, or take up running, or do Couch 5K, and you want some head work, I can slightly help you with that, but I'm not really. I actually, in the end, realised that I was much better at being a librarian than I ever was at being a sports psychologist. I didn't fancy working with elite populations, really. And the bit that I really liked was working with people and kind of helping them make exercise change. And actually helping people is being a librarian. So actually, I'm in the right place. I'm currently doing my CILIP fellowship, which is going so incredibly badly. Oh my goodness, so badly. So I'm on my third draft of my portfolio at the moment, and I'm really bad at writing about myself. They want you to evaluate what you do in an evaluative statement, and I'm really bad at actually explaining my working. I tend to just do stuff, and I'll explain more about this when I talk about the podcast. I tend to have an idea and just go, how does that work? And crack on with it. I don't sit and read a book or a manual or anything. I'm just not that person. So I'm really struggling to explain my working with all the stuff I've done. I've got a couple of people that are kind of helping me out with it, but it's a bit painful, to be honest with you. I'm not selling fellowship to you. I realise that. So I've also whacked in. So you've got my career, you've got my qualifications, and now you've got some life events. And this is what you never, ever hear about in a conference presentation. So this is all the scary stuff that people hide, because what you get generally is the career slides, and you hear about the brilliant project they've worked on and how seamless and wonderful their life is and how marvellous it's all gone. And nobody talks about the stuff that happens underneath. So I've been made redundant twice. I actually left Oxford after 7 months for lots of reasons, but mainly because I needed someone to fund my library course because I was very poor. I had twins in 2007. They're now 11 years old. I also have stress-related anxiety and depression. I've had serious bouts of that in the last few years. And the kind of, you can see this picture of someone, and it's not quite how things really are. I won an award in 2017. I've been doing the podcast for the last 18 months. I've been doing the conference circuit. This is now the 14th event I've done, I think, since April last year. Yeah, that's good. I'm chair of the Association of Librarians in the Social Sciences, and I've had some severe bouts of stress-related anxiety as well. I think I've probably had anxiety in the various forms for my entire life, and I think now, if I was a child now, I would have had a lot more support, but nobody talks about that. You're just a bit weird. And nobody really wants to deal with that when you can't sleep and you're worrying about everything and you think that terrible things are going to happen to you and everyone you love. And actually, I only got kind of officially diagnosed when I was 28. So it's been quite a big thing to be open about that and talk about it. And I'm so glad that now the conversation about mental health is changing and we're much better at understanding it and not telling people they're having hissy fits or telling people to pull themselves together. We're much better at being understanding about it. Health and resilience. So this is something that comes up a lot. So I remember when I had my twins and I was in hospital and one of the midwives came up, she said, "Oh, you're doing ever so well." And I was like, broken with a nightie with my hair all over the place and I had these things I had no idea what to do with. "Oh, you're doing ever so well." And that's brilliant because I'm like, yay, I'm so excellent. When inside I'm feeling terrible. I chaired an Alice event on wellbeing at the end of last year. Someone came up to me afterwards, one of the delegates, she said, "I read about you, you're very accomplished." And I went, "Really? Oh, okay." But what you read isn't what's actually happening. I mean, it partly is, but also I'm very good at hiding what's going on with how I'm feeling. And the more I do and the more successful I look, the harder I'm having to work to hide what's going on. So I've got kind of resilience in overdrive, is what it's called. We do a thing called Strength Scope at work. We do an emerging talent programme. And they talk about your strengths in overdrive, and mine is extreme resilience. So if I have a problem, I'll go and do something really great to kind of as a coping mechanism. And there's a term called high functioning anxiety, where you will look at someone and you'll see their list of achievements, which actually I gave you, and then you won't see all the other stuff that's gone on underneath that. And it's not a recognised term, but I think it's something that will become more recognised. And I'm not going to sit in the room or stand here and say, "Oh, has anyone else got a mental health issue?" But I'm fully, because that would just be a bit weird. But you may have mental health issues. You may be living with someone that does. You may have a family member who has them. Your colleague may have them. The person sitting in your office may have them. They may have talked to you about them. They may not have done. But that's something to be aware of. I mean, I can't remember the stats on how many of us actually have some kind of mental health crisis at some point in our lives, but it's more than you will ever think and more than people will ever tell you. So I'm going to talk about one of mine, and you're going to get a bit of this. I can't give you all of it because I could be here for another week. I'm going to talk about the work-related bit of mine. Most of the time I can manage my mental health quite well. In 2016, things went horrifically wrong. A series of things happened, and it got to a point where I couldn't deal with life anymore. The work stuff I will talk about because it's relevant to everyone here. I started off as a lone worker at Kafkas. I then got a full-time library assistant. In 2015, they gave me a full-time library assistant and a part-time library assistant. In 2016, they both left within 2 months of each other. They both got qualified and moved on to other roles, which is exactly what you want from your staff. But also, it was quite hard for me. I ended up running the library on my own for 6 months. The workload increased massively. I was working hugely long hours, obviously working on all the horrific subjects I've described to you and far more. As long as I worked really long hours and didn't take any leave or any toil or anything like that, then I could just about manage the service. I described it to my manager at the time as I was in a boat filling up with water, and I had an egg cup to get the water out with. It was just utterly unsustainable. I was also professionally isolated. So one of the things I've noticed here, I was at dinner last night, I've been here all day, and I've actually tweeted about it, is how lucky you all are to have a professional network here in Cambridge. And I'm sure sometimes it might feel a bit cliquey, a bit claustrophobic, a bit, oh God, that's someone I want to avoid as you see them coming across the quad at you. But actually, you are so lucky to have that. I'm someone that needs people around me. I need people to talk to. I'm a very chatty, outgoing person. I became professionally isolated because I was so busy at work. I had to drop all of my CPD completely. I was on various cross-government library committees. They all had to go. I limited things on the Alice committee that I was on before I was chair. I didn't do any of kind of revalidation or anything like that. I just couldn't touch it. I couldn't go to a conference. I would see conferences being tweeted about and think, that doesn't relate to me at all anymore. And I've chatted to lots of people while I'm here, and I just think you're just so lucky to have each other, because having to manufacture those networks, which I've had to do in various ways, and I'll talk about the podcast, where I have had to manufacture that, it's really hard. So you have a captive audience of people you can go and talk to if you've got an issue, or someone will know someone that can help with the thing you're working on. But if you don't have that, I can't tell you how hard it is, actually. I kept going for as long as I could, and I managed it for about 6 months, with people telling me you need to stop and you need to take time off, and I kind of refused because the service was my third baby. I couldn't give it up. I knew how important it was that the service existed. But it did go really horribly wrong. And eventually I went to my GP, and after the third time I saw her in 2016, she signed me off work. And I felt a huge sense of responsibility, actually, because I knew I wouldn't be back at work for a while, and library service would still be needed. So I'm just going to kind of describe some of the symptoms of what actually happens. And bear in mind that mental health is very individual. So worse things have happened to other people and they've coped better. Less has happened to other people and they've felt worse. But I'm just going to describe a few of the kind of the things that happened to me. So I became incredibly forgetful. I'm someone that's relied on having an excellent memory. I've been prided on, people say, oh, you remember everything, Jo. I became incredibly forgetful to the point where I forgot to take my laptop to work with me, not just once, but several times, which is difficult. My brain was just full of fog, so I couldn't actually kind of I felt like I was kind of like disconnected from things. I had panic attacks. The first one actually was on the night when the Brexit result got announced, so there might be a correlation there. But that was really grim. I struggled to interact with people. I couldn't talk to anyone. I couldn't concentrate. So, for example, I would be at work, and obviously I didn't have anyone around me because the desks around me were empty. I had no staff, and if I had to go and get water from the kitchen, I would wait until there was no one there and run over, get my water and run back, because I couldn't face talking to anyone. I couldn't concentrate on anything. My concentration was shot. My commute became frightening. I live in South East London in Greenwich, well, near Greenwich actually. I commute into central London, Tottenham Court Road, and I couldn't bear to even get off the train in the morning. It became that overwhelming and frightening. I've lived in London since 2004, so... my office became overwhelming, just the lights, the noise, the people, just awful. And I just got to a point where I couldn't do my job anymore, so I had to stop, and that was horrific. Afterwards, my short-term memory disappeared, and to be honest, I'm 2 years on and sometimes things go. So I actually have my entire talk written out, so if I forget it, which can happen because words just leave my brain, it's there. So I wish I could do it without, but I can't, I'm afraid. It got to a point where if I went to a shop and wanted to get something, or I had to have to photograph the thing on my phone. I fell asleep during conversations. My sister came around to see me and I fell asleep. She's not really boring. It was just I couldn't deal with talking to anyone. I couldn't read text longer than a page. I'm the kid, like maybe most of you here, who used to rinse through their library card every week, reading 8 books a week and borrowing my sister's ticket. Couldn't read a book, couldn't read a page, couldn't read anything. Couldn't read Heat magazine, that's how bad it was. Couldn't write anything, couldn't write an email, that was terrifying. When it became apparent I wouldn't be back at work for a bit, my manager phoned me up and said, I know you don't want to talk to me right now, but we've had an emergency meeting of the senior managers and we need to work out how to run a skeleton service in your absence. Can you tell us how to log into the library management system? And I couldn't remember the password. This was something I'd used every day for 6, 7, 8 years. I couldn't remember it. I couldn't write an email, I couldn't write text of any sort at all. I got very panicky in crowds. That was really difficult, actually. If you live in London, you're surrounded by people all the time. I couldn't watch TV. The only TV I managed to watch during this time was Strictly, and it's actually back on now, the SAS programme. For some reason, I really like that, and that's really horrible. They're really mean to each other. But for some reason, I like that. That was weird. I couldn't make decisions at all. So I'd stand in the supermarket and my husband would say to me, "What do you want for dinner?" And I'd go, "No," and have to leave, because I just couldn't deal with any form of decision making whatsoever. And I couldn't watch films. And actually, I didn't go to the cinema for about 18 months because I couldn't. It was just sensory overload. I couldn't deal with it. Although the first film I went to see when I was better was Thor Ragnarok at the IMAX, which was really stupid because it's all light and colour and fighty things and Chris Hemsworth and it was just too much. And actually, even now, I can't really read fiction. I can read fiction occasionally, but I really can't deal with it. So I read an awful lot of non-fiction. So what did I do? I got employer support. If you're employed by an organisation that employs a lot of social workers who go through a bad time, they have an excellent employee assistance programme in place. So they triaged me over the phone. They gave me 8 sessions of therapy, absolutely free. The therapist worked out that basically I'd used my brain as a computer for most of my life and I'd worn it out. If you don't top up your resilience, then you lose it and you become incredibly unwell, which is what I'd done. She also identified the professional isolation I was experiencing, which was very unhealthy. I also deployed some soft strategies as well. Now, these are really individual. So it's things like, for example, Instagram. Weirdly, I hate Facebook now. I cannot deal with it. I loathe it. I'm on there because family are on there. But I hate the showing off and the parenting pissing contest that is Facebook. Just awful. I cannot deal with it at all. Instagram I love because it's visual. So I'm still not great with words sometimes. So Instagram is great. And actually all the photos on the background of my talk are all photos I've taken when I've been out running, which is my other distraction technique. So I'm a runner. I'm a really not very good runner. I'm endurance. I've got no speed. I do stuff, but it's not, I'm never going to be Mo Farah. But I really enjoy running. And I do nail painting. I paint other people's nails. I think I'll probably qualify as a nail technician at some point. I'm really missing Strictly very badly. I may have mentioned that a little bit. I'm so lucky to have such an excellent support network at home, not necessarily professionally until very recently, but at home I've got a support network. When Kafkas realised that they really needed a library service, I'd had to fight for all the time that I'd been on my own. I'd had to write business case after business case to try and get a new library assistant. They kept getting turned down because Kafkas is sponsored by the Ministry of Justice, obviously a government department. There's officially no money at the moment. Maybe if we weren't spending it on other stuff, we'd have money to support services like ours. But there we are. So I was having to go through business cases and they couldn't understand why I needed an assistant. Well, I'd want to have a holiday occasionally, would be quite nice. And actually do all the stuff that I needed to do to develop. Magically, when I went off on sick leave for nearly 2 months, they accelerated the process to get a library assistant and a full-time one was in place when I went back. So it's amazing what can happen if they really have a crisis. But otherwise, I wouldn't have got anyone. So I'm very lucky to have that. And I've really developed my support network over the last 18 months particularly. So why did I create a podcast? So I emerged from this fog of being incredibly unwell and decided to create a podcast. So as part of my re-entering the library world again, I applied to get a bursary to the SLIP conference. Another thing about working non-departmental public bodies, there's no money for CPD, so I have to fund all my own CPD. So the only way I can attend conferences is either speaking at them, or do workshops at them, or actually getting bursaries. So I got a bursary to the SLIP conference that was in Manchester in 2017. The bit that's always fascinated me, and it's the bit I emphasised at the beginning, is the career stories. I'm actually not that interested in the brilliant project you've done. I'd much rather hear about how you got to the point where you're standing up and telling me about what you've done. So career stories are the thing that really interests me. And I was out on a run actually, and I thought, I like podcasts. How do they work? Could I create my own one? And how difficult would it be to create my own podcast? And I had the light bulb moment. Ding! So how did I set Librarians' Lives up? So I've been listening to podcasts like probably most or all of you since about 2010. All the big ones like Entertainment and some of the radio podcasts. There's one at the moment I really like, Smersh Pod, which is about the James Bond films. And I'm someone that I work at home 2 days a week. one of the beauties of running a remote library service is that I don't need to be physically in the office all the time. So I work at home 2 days a week, but I can't deal with silence. Otherwise, I start thinking too much, and that's not good. So I like to have voices when I'm talking that aren't my own head telling me I'm an idiot. So I listen to a lot of podcasts. And actually, I'm also not great with silence because I've got twins who are incredibly loud and just talk over each other all the time to make their point and get louder and louder and louder. So when they're not in the house, I need noise. To me, podcasts felt like an extension of radio, and they always felt quite elitist, so they would be produced by the BBC or big podcast producers or things like This American Life or Serial, so they've got a big backing behind them, so that isn't accessible. But you will have all noticed the explosion in podcasting over the last few years, and I saw a brilliant joke from a comedian on Twitter, I think it was yesterday, maybe it's Mark Watson, who said it's now scientifically proven that every person in the world has now got 4 podcasts that they do, which it feels like it's the case now, because every week there's just a new podcast happening. So it's become less of a thing that proper grown-ups do and something that everyone can do. What I didn't really kind of anticipate or realise was that most podcasts have presenters, and then they have producers and editors and marketers and a whole team of people sitting behind them. I didn't quite realise that when I set my own one up. But actually there's been an explosion in democratisation of podcasting in the last few years, and then the information is there. So basically I just Googled how to set up a podcast, that stupid and that simple, and fell down a rabbit hole of information and guides. So let's talk about the tech that I use to do the podcast. So initially I thought my Salute Fellowship is going really badly. I should be really innovative, and what I'll do, I'll record a load of audio interviews with people who are working in the profession in different sectors, and I will talk to them, and I will upload the audio files to my Salute portfolio, and they'll go, this is great, we must give her F-clip immediately. And that was my plan. So that was what I decided to do. So I did put a call out on my Joe Wood 04 Twitter, and said, anyone want to come on the podcast? Got a few people, mostly people I kind of already knew a bit, to come on and record episodes. And then people said, oh, could we hear it? And I was like, really? You want to hear it? Okay. So I thought I would just, and then I was like, well, fine. Okay, they're on SoundCloud. I'll tweet the link out. That's fine. And I basically put together a little script, and it's really basic. So it's very simple questions, because it's not an intellectual exercise. I'm not probing them on their thoughts on information literacy or copyright or GDPR. It's a platform for them to share their story and actually collaborate and connect with other people in the same position as them, or to learn more about different bits of the profession. So I asked them about their first experience of libraries, their qualifications, their career journey, so their jobs in the sector or outside, actually, if they've gone out and come back, the CPD that they do, things that really frustrate them. That's provided quite a rich stream of really interesting things, awful lot of commonalities there about academic librarians always talk about issues with vendors and collaboration and that kind of thing. So certain things kind of pop up a lot. Their achievements, that's really nice. Some people are really shy about it, and I kind of went, oh no, and then actually do think of things they've achieved. Their dream library job and location, that's thrown up some really interesting answers. Mostly it's kind of fictional ones. Buffy the Vampire Slayer comes up so much, and the library from the Mummy. And their dream library colleague, so Giles from Buffy, if I get him again, really, because he's rubbish. He's actually a really bad librarian, because he just doesn't want to help anyone at all. He just wants to sit with his books. He doesn't want to do any outreach work, does he? So Giles from Buffy comes up an awful lot. Or people that people fancy has come up quite a lot as well. And then I also asked them what they would do if I put them in charge of the profession for a day. And almost everyone says reinvigorate public libraries and reopen all the public libraries. That one comes up a lot. There have been some really innovative dream library jobs that people have come up with. So someone wanted to create a video games library. Someone else wanted a board games library. I want to run a library on a cruise ship. I want to run my current library on a cruise ship doing world cruises. And I'd have port keys to let people come in and out. That would be quite good. It's been such a big learning curve. So I recorded the in-person interviews using the voice memo app on my iPhone, and then I ended up getting a Blue Yeti microphone because originally I was just kind of talking at my desktop computer. Then I found out about Blue Yeti microphones. I edit using Audacity, which is an amazing piece of free software, and it's used by people who just love sharing their information about it. So anytime I've got an issue that I need to deal with, I can just Google or go onto the Audacity help forums, and someone has answered the question. I wanted to make the podcast free for me, for people listening, and for me. It's not really worked out like that, because I've had to buy a Blue Yeti microphone, a little microphone that plugs into my my iPhone socket. I used to use a Dell desktop computer. I've now got a very fancy kind of hybrid laptop thing, although I didn't pay for most of that because I got sponsorship from ILI to podcast there, so they gave me money and I got a new laptop, which was nice. I started off with a limited SoundCloud account, the lowest one you could get. I now have a SoundCloud Pro Unlimited account, which is spendy, but there's no limit on the amount I can upload to it. When people started listening to the podcast, someone said, well, that's no good. I can't listen to it if I use Apple Podcasts. So you have to submit your podcast to Apple Podcasts. They have to approve it. I don't understand the process, but one day it happened to be there. It's now available on all third-party podcast apps that I'm aware of. I know it's on Acast. I found it on various other ones that I'm not even aware exist, but it's there. There's an RSS feed as well. I promote it via the Librarians with Lives blog. And on Twitter at Libs with Lives, I had to have a bit of separation between me and all the things I love, Bake Off, that kind of thing, and the podcast, so Libs with Lives. It's on LinkedIn. I hate LinkedIn, but I can see the use for it. And I've got a Buy Me a Coffee account, and that's not going very well. I'm not getting very much money for it, because why would people pay when it's free? But there we are. So how has it brought librarians together? That bottom right is my alter ego. So that is, I actually went to the House of Commons Open Day last year, about a year ago, and I bowled up to one of the librarians at the House of Commons Library and said, oh, I'd love it if one of you came on the podcast. And she said, podcast? And I said, yes, I do a library podcast. She went, really? Really? Oh. And didn't quite believe I did one. So I actually had business cards made, which is a bit, but I had them made, and they're very cool, actually. So it kind of proves it's a legitimate thing, I think. I've released 45 regular episodes. Episode 46 will be going out next week. And that stars Ellie Downs, who works in Wales. I met her at the Aberystwyth the Slip in Wales conference at Aberystwyth. Top 5 most listened to episodes are Nick Paul from SILIP, Chief Executive of SILIP, Helen Berry, who works for SILIP Info. That's because completists who hear about the podcast go back to episode 1 and then work their way through it. So they don't pick and choose. Because sometimes people ask me to pick, what are your favourite episodes? Well, that's like choosing my favourite child. I can't choose a favourite episode. That's not fair. So I kind of highlight 1 or 2 that I sense they might like a bit more. But it's really hard for me to actually think about that. I was invited to the SLIP conference in Brighton last year to do a conference special. So I was actually going around with my iPhone, interviewing people about, what's your name, why are you here, what are you enjoying, that kind of thing. Stitched all those together, turned that into a SLIP Conference 18 special, which a lot of people and their mums got very excited about. So that's why that's in there, because lots of people went, I've been on a podcast, and they all listened to it. Natasha Chowdhury, her episode's been really popular. And Ian Ansis of Public Libraries News, who's recently recognised in the New Year's Honours List. So those are kind of the most popular episodes. There's also been a side special on Librarians Who Run, because there's an awful lot of crossover between the two. There's now a group on Strava. I recently did an episode on musicals with a friend who works up in York St John University. I'd like to do more of that, because it is Librarians with Lives thing, otherwise it all gets a bit samey. And I did a whole series of podcasts for Internet Librarian International. The whole of October was dedicated to them, so I interviewed people, the keynotes, and it was their 20th anniversary, so I got to talk to them about that. And I interviewed 50 delegates over 2 days from 20 odd different countries, which was interesting, and they gave me my own stand. So, like the vendor stands you've got out here, upstairs, I had my own one with a lollipop and everything, and I actually got to take the sign home because it had an official, Librarians with Lives podcasting at ILI, which is very exciting. So I took that home with me when I left. The December stats should be about the same as the November stats, actually. I did this kind of mid-December, but I needed to submit this before Christmas. But that's how it's grown. So as of today, I checked the stats just before I started speaking. From SoundCloud, there have been 16,000 direct listens. Stats for third-party apps and iTunes and Apple Podcasts are more opaque. So I actually don't know. So this is a baseline of stats. But bearing in mind that this was a project I started, 1, to talk to people, 2, to reconnect with people from the profession, and 3, for my F-clip, that anyone is listening to it just astonishes me. The fact that 16,000 people that I am aware of have listened, and I don't know how many other thousands have beyond that, but it's just insane, actually. And people are still interested in it and still want to be involved in it, which is really great. There's a dip in August 2018 because I was on holiday, didn't release any episodes. The 3 big spikes represent the CILIP conference, ILI, and Nick Paul being on the podcast. They're the big spikes. So that explains those. But otherwise, it's reasonable. It's kind of grown, but it's consistent. So in red, SoundCloud Unlimited gives me loads of stats about who's listening. And again, these are a baseline. They give me the top 50 countries where the podcast's been listened to, and I've highlighted those in red. I've clearly got work to do in China. I think I've got a problem there. I don't think I'm going to manage to solve that one. Middle East, again, Africa and a bit of South America. But otherwise, that's bearing in mind the podcast is me in my pyjamas at 8:30 when my kids are in bed on a school night, chatting to people on the internet. I'm quite quietly chuffed about that, I have to say. And what started as kind of a therapy for me has become this thing that I now get to go and talk to people about, which is just astonishing, really, to be honest with you. And I love that. And I do update the map periodically. When I did this ILI, there weren't as many countries on it. There were a few more now, so I need to go and check it again, actually. So what's it done for me? Well, obviously I'm here. I've done conference presentations and workshops. I've spoken, this is my 14th different event since April last year. I deliver presentations like this one on mental health and professional resilience, connecting people through podcasting, in collaboration with Mike Jones, who works at the University of Winchester. I interviewed him for the podcast because he and I really struggled with networking at conferences. We put together a workshop on that using board games, so I was really chuffed to see the board games that were out today, because that's one of the things we kind of say about displacement activities for people that find conferences hard. I've spoken at events in England, Scotland and Wales, and I've spoken at all the mainland CILIP events. I've met some amazing people in the process. And I went through a phase last year where I was mentioned in every issue of Information Professional magazine, which was bizarre. I've also written articles for Alice Quarterly and the Multimedia and Information Technology Group blog. I did the live podcasting that I've talked about. I became chair of Alice, which I'm really enjoying. I was a guest on Calon FM, which is the Wrexham community radio station, in October, which tied in with World Mental Health Day, and talked about mental health and professional resilience in the podcast. And I got to choose all the music, so it was sort of like Desert Island Discs for an hour, which was so exciting. And I managed to refrain, because everyone was joking that I would choose George Michael and Steps, and I didn't choose either, so I did choose the Bee Gees though, so there we are. And I've also, I don't know if any of you know Gaz Johnson, he's Lord Llama on Twitter. He does a series of podcasts called Dr. Weasel, not Weasel, it's Weasel, apparently. And I've guested it, and I've done voiceover work for him. I played a jaded space scientist in one of his series, and I was a sorceress who died a dramatic screaming death in his Christmas pantomime, which was released in December. And I had to record different versions of my screaming death, which was really fun. So that was cool. And really surreally, I've become kind of one of the faces of CILIP. So when I was at the CILIP conference, they said, "Oh, Jo, do you mind having your photo taken? Just sign a thing." And I was like, "Oh, great, that's useful to have a headshot, actually, for conference stuff and articles and at work and LinkedIn and that kind of thing." And they won't use my face. And then I was at ILI, and Gemma from CILIP came up and said, "I've got a present for you." And she gave me a bookmark and a postcard. And I went, "Oh, that's nice. All right." She turned them over, and there was my headshot on them advertising CILIP, because I'd signed my life away. And the amount of grief I've had from my family and my friends about the fact that I'm now the face of CILIP. I'm not, I'm one of several. And when the CILIP renewals went out, the postcard had my face on, so people were tweeting me going, "Oh, I've had you through the post, Jo." Oh, God. Okay, and I was apologising. They even sent them to my parents. Awful. So how's Librarians with Lives helped others? So I got people who'd been on the podcast, who had listened, who were fans, to give me some kind of things that had happened to them that had really made a difference. So it's about growing in confidence, recognising that people are important and that they matter. A lot of people know Catherine, I think, from episode 7. Everyone seems to know her. Catherine Birchall. Rhiannon was a trainee. Was she here last year, I think? Some people who got very jaded with the profession have been on and then rediscovered their love for it. I really love the one at the bottom right. Francesca had recently graduated from university, I think it was last year, and she was working in marketing as a trainee, and she really hated it. And she Googled how to become a librarian, and for some reason Librarians' Lives podcast popped up. And she started listening, and now she works in a school library and is going to do her library qualification. And if I achieved nothing else from doing the podcast, the fact that I've got someone into the profession that wouldn't have found it, I think I'm really proud of that. And I now have this little cohort of alumni, and there are loads of them obviously now. I've done quite a lot of episodes of people that are now talking to each other across the world. I've interviewed people obviously in the UK, in Australia and the US, who will talk to each other and collaborate on stuff and talk about the silly stuff they love, musicals and all the silly things they like, and memes on Twitter and that kind of thing. People that would never have interacted with each other otherwise have come together because of this podcast. So I'm really proud of that effect as well, actually. So you want to start your own library podcast? Well, this is what I said earlier about the how not to do it. So I had no plan when I started, apart from uploading a few episodes to SoundCloud and seeing how it goes. I'm now asked for advice from people working in libraries who want to set up their own podcasts. My first piece of advice is have a plan and actually decide when you're going to release episodes, how much work you're going to do, who's going to do it. Is more than one of you going to do it? Because at the moment, this is all me. Do experimenting secretly. I've released every episode I've ever recorded, apart from one where the person wasn't happy with it and asked for it not to be released, and that's fine. I'm not going to release something that someone isn't happy with. So secretly experiment, don't release them, make your mistakes privately, don't make them publicly. Hone your interview technique. This is something I've really struggled with because I'm a chatty person, so I just want to have a chat. So I've had to really hone that and kind of change it. Don't let it take over your life. That's not really worked because it really has taken over my life. And bearing in mind I've got a full-time job and a family and hobbies and interests beyond. I'm currently training for an ultramarathon, which will be my second one in 2 years. So it could really take over your life. And because I really enjoy it, I want to keep doing it. So I kind of have to balance my life quite well. Good podcasting isn't free. So if you are going to podcast, you need to accept that it's going to cost money at some point. If you can get backing, that's really good. I'm a bit shy about getting sponsorship, so I'm really bad at I should go and seek it out, I guess. ILI kind of approached me and said, we'd like you to podcast. And I was like, can you give me some money? So that's how that happened, but otherwise I'm not bold enough to do it, which is why people have marketing people that do it for them. So bear in mind there will be a cost either to you or your institution if you do set up a podcast. And think about accessibility as well. So I know someone who works in the NHS, and she would really like to listen to the podcast, but she's deaf. And I can't provide transcripts because the episodes, I originally planned for them to be about 30 minutes long, and they tend to run to about 45 minutes to an hour, sometimes slightly longer if the person's really chatty. And I can't write transcripts for them. And I don't have the means to do that. So do think about accessibility as well when you start out, because I really didn't. And that's now kind of something I'm finding quite hard to change, and I wish I could. Doing a library podcast, it's been really inspiring actually getting to know people again, because having been professionally isolated for so long, being so unwell, I'd forgotten how great information professionals are actually. So it is really inspiring to hear what people are up to. The school librarians, particularly I've interviewed, have just been amazing, and the stuff they do is just phenomenal. In the way that they engage children with reading is just fabulous. It's life affirming as well, because you talk to these people and you're like, yeah, actually life's pretty good. And it's been a great way for me to meet information professionals, either online or virtually, which has been really fun. It's been given me so many opportunities, and I'm so grateful for them. And it's the best CPD activity I've actually ever done. And I have to remind myself of this because I went through quite a hard time with the podcast in autumn last year. Nick Paul had talked to me about librarian and librarian violence, particularly online and particularly on Twitter. But I didn't think what I was doing would actually bother anyone, because I was offering a positive platform for people to share their experiences and talk about their careers, and there's nothing negative there. It was all good stuff. it turned out that Librarians with Lives has, I don't quite know what's going on now, a minority of hate listeners who listen to the podcast specifically so they can subtweet about it, they can bitch about it, they can be mean about me, they can be mean about people that appear on it and engage with it and interact with it. And I kind of knew this was happening. It was kind of background noise somewhere over there for most of the year. So I didn't seek it out, I didn't go looking, I didn't go searching for my name or anything like that. But it was really drawn to my attention in September when someone emerged and decided to attack me for some stuff I'd said that was very innocuous. And after I blocked the person, after trying to engage with them, they wrote horrible things about me for about 48 hours, just continuously. I saw about 5% of that. I decided I didn't want to see any more of it. It got pretty grim. I had some time off work. It really affected my anxiety. That was not great. After that, I actually went and spoke at all these different events, so 7 events in 6 weeks. And I knew it was bad. I've never read any of the stuff. I think a lot of it's been deleted now. People would come up to me who had never met me and go, "Are you okay? I saw what had been written about you online." And I was like, "I'm fine. I hadn't read it. I didn't know." I had no idea. But I knew it was bad because people were so worried and people were contacting me privately on Twitter particularly, say, "Oh, I've seen the latest thing that's been said about you. Are you okay?" Haven't seen it. And I think I'm better off not seeing it, to be honest. Also, I'm not massively fond of drama llamas who bring the problems to my yard, frankly. But there we are. It really affected my enjoyment of the podcast. And actually, that's really sad because I'm really proud of it and what it's done and what it's still doing, actually. And it really knocked my mental health and my recovery, so that was difficult. And I am recovering from that now, slowly. And I now recognise that it is the best CPD activity I've ever done and will ever do. And frankly, it's been the best distraction from fellowship I could ever imagine. I would much rather be positive and give people the chance to share their stories than be negative and be bullying and belittling people online because they're not thinking the same way as them or they don't have the same worldview or for whatever reason. It seems to be negative voices don't like positive voices. And I will always try and be a positive voice. I will never, ever stoop to that level. I will never be negative about the profession or other librarians. I just won't go there. I'm aware the podcast doesn't fix me. It's not a panacea for my mental health. And I'm never going to be fully better. And that's been a real learning thing for me over the last year, is that nothing will actually make me better. I'm always going to be that person who goes through the bad times. But it does act as a protective mechanism because it reminds me that there are people beyond and there are people out there that are interested and care and that I can talk to. And I'm so lucky to be where I am now. I'm just so grateful for that. Just over 2 years ago, I thought I was done with the profession. I thought I couldn't be a librarian anymore. I didn't think I was wanted. And actually, if I'd had what happened in September, when I was really ill, I wouldn't be working in a library now. I wouldn't be standing here. I used to joke that I would go and work in Starbucks because clearly I wasn't very good at being a librarian. Through doing the podcast and kind of rediscovering the enjoyment of my job, and I really love my job, for all the difficulties that I get that happen, I really love it. And I do have something to offer the library world. And I was worth saving, and it was worth getting better for, coming back, and doing stuff like this has just been brilliant. So thank you so much. Here's where you can find me, and the screen's gone. There we go. See, I talked so much, the screen's gone blank, so I'm so sorry. So thank you so much for listening. Here's where you can find me and the podcast. As I said, that's more kind of me as a person. That's the podcast hardcore. Contact me and I'll send you the links to the episodes and things like that. I will try and guide you if there's particular subjects you're interested in. I can kind of point you in the right direction. I'm happy to do that. If any of you fancy being a guest on the podcast, I'm kind of looking, because I had a few banked up. I'm still releasing stuff I recorded in September because I just couldn't face releasing stuff for a bit. But I'm now back doing that again. So if any of you want to be on it, then do let me know. You know people that would be really interesting, then come and talk to me afterwards. I'm happy to chat to people afterwards or online, if that's better. I'm aware it's Friday afternoon, we're probably desperate to get home. Thank you so much for listening, and are there any questions? I think I've broken them. That's it, I'm done, bye. No, but anyway, seriously, if there's anything you want to talk to me about offline, or any questions you've got about supporting colleagues with mental health, podcasting, anything like that, then do get in contact with me. Thank you.